Akwaba, guys, we glad for see it. Today, we're continuing the discussion on the impact of early childhood experiences on mental health. This is the second episode of this discussion. I'm joined by Professor Shiona Robertson again, and we will continue to have the discussions regarding such a very important topic and very needed topic to be discussing at this time. I want to go straight into it and pick up from where we left off
Mhm.
last week. And so, my question to you this week would be, are there any specific periods in early childhood development that is more impactful on a child's mental health?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. I think last week we talked a little bit about, or touched on certainly brain development. And I think that's the place to start when we think about critical periods and what's kind of happening for kids internally and how then external environments impact that. So when babies are born, their brains are incredibly dense and there's not a lot of neural connections being made, essentially, if I to put it um, in its simplest terms. And so through caregiving environment, through just the baby going through its day-to-day, with numbers of experiences, numbers of input, the baby's brain is developing from the bottom regions, which is our lower regions, such as our brain stem, which has to do with our automatic functioning, like breathing, blinking, swallowing, blood pressure, heart rate, up into our midbrain and limbic brain, which is more, has a lot more to do with things around making sense of our world and this, and where our brain takes in sensorial input and processes that, right the way to the cortex, or the
Mm.
part of the brain we all think of, that wrinkly thinking
Mhm.
part of the brain. Now, in those early birth to three in particular, a, a big part of what's going on in the developing brain are structures are um, being created, or neural networks are being created that will form the basis of uh, regulation.
Mm.
And so many people have talked about, or are familiar with the term self-regulation.
Mhm.
And I would argue that there's a lot of misconceptions around the term self-regulation. You know, from my point of view, um, few of us truly self-regulate.
Mm.
We're social beings, and we often require other people to co-regulate with us. Now, this is
Hmm.
particularly true
Hmm.
for children who rely on their caregivers, whoever that may be, or family, community, to co-regulate and help them. So those young parts are those children have a lot going on in their development and can be particularly uh, their brain sensitive to trauma, stress,
Mhm.
environmental disruption, things like that. You know, as we go on in childhood, the brain is still developing. I mean, our brains don't um, fully kind of mature till our 20s.
Mhm.
In adolescence, people tend to think of this not in terms of such a critical period of development. However, there's a lot going on in adolescence. Uh, Typically, youth are often finding themselves and developing that more, hopefully, cohesive
Mhm.
sense of self or their identity. And that will very much depend on numbers of factors like culture, the society they're raised in, socialization, um, along with some developmental periods that we see. You know, we
Mm.
often see our youth tend to gravitate far more towards other young people and their peers,
Mhm.
and that being a very typical phase. And so people, if youth experience trauma, for example, during that phase, it can, yes, it can impact parts of their brain, but it can also impact that formation of their identity. So really, if I had to sum it up, anything from conception right the way through, I mean, I think last week we touched on traumatic stress during pregnancy. And so depending on what's going on in the mother's body and what the mother is experiencing, that will have an impact potentially on the developing fetus, which then can have an impact on the child and perhaps sometimes how they present, their temperament, all those kind of pieces.
Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing you talk about co-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say that I've heard so many times the term self-regulate. To me, I agree with you. It's used so loosely, like, everything is self-regulate. You need to self-regulate. But you mentioned co-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And can you expound some more on that? Because I'm thinking, one of the things that I'm thinking in my head immediately is, do adults require co-regulation?
It's a great question. And I would say yes. We all have it to an extent. You know, if we think about, if we experience something stressful in life, and maybe something that elevates our stress out with typical day-to-day, often people will turn to someone, turn to relationships to co-regulate. Either it might be friends, it might be partners, it might be parents or siblings or community members, whoever it is people have, but we will turn to other people to kind of co-regulate, to share what we're experiencing, to have hopefully an empathetic ear, experience some compassion from someone, and in their calmness, we become calmer. You know, we often, when we're working or training CYCs, the child and youth care practitioners, one of the things I'll often say to them is, you need to be the locus of control. You need to be what you want to see in the children, in the youth, in the parents. And that means if they're dysregulated, you need to stay calm. Keep a warm tone, soft eyes, be purposeful in what you say. Don't use too many sentences or words. Be really intentional in your presence. Be kind of still. Don't be flapping your hands everywhere. But we do these things because they're soothing and calming. And adults need that too. Adults can get dysregulated. In terms of self-regulation, when we're thinking about it as adults, yes, people need the ability to have a regulated response going on in their bodies and on the day-to-day. And by that, I mean modulation of their emotions. And this is the piece that I think when we talk about self-regulation, certainly this is what I refer to, is that modulation of emotions. So rather than somebody going 0 to 100, we tend to go through phases of emotional reactions to some kind of stimulus. So for example, we have a bill to pay, and we're maybe knowing that we're going to be late with our bill payment, and people are going to be calling, and it's going to get irritating. Rather than on that first call where whoever the hydro's calling to say you missed your bill payment, rather than screaming and blowing a fuse, what we would expect to happen, you know, with that person may become irritated. They may become a bit frustrated. The second, third calls, they might start getting annoyed. But they're not going from 0 to rageful. That there's modulations, there's phases of that. And this is what a lot of those pieces happen in that early childhood. You know, toddlers, if we think about, often tantrum. We don't typically expect to see an adult tantrum. But toddlers tantrum because their brains are still developing, and that modulation is still in transit, if you like, or in process. And through secure caregiving, nurturing caregiving that labels for children, what's going on for them and why what it is they're feeling and why they're feeling, that's empathetic. I think of Dan Hughes's model as my favorite. He developed the PACE model, which stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy. And what he says is, as a caregiver, as a parent to children, if you can take that approach with them around whatever it is in life, that if they're experiencing some kind of upset or distress, that we can be playful in our approach with them, that we can convey acceptance of them, not necessarily the behavior, that we become curious about why is this happening and how is this happening as a kid, and then we convey empathy and understanding, that kind of interaction will help kids. And it's that kind of positive, nurturing interaction that'll lead to kids developing a stronger, securer attachment, if you like. And that has an impact on brain development, and then the emotional development and the social development.
So how